Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I guess that's where I'd like to start, is just by thanking you for joining today in this exciting topic of donor retention. I know this is normally the busiest time of year for many of you, so I just want to make sure that your time here is valuable and that hopefully we can make it a little bit enjoyable at the same time. Before we get into things, I just want to point a couple things out for you as we go through the presentation today. One is that there is a Q&A section that you should see inside your browser. So as we talk about things, if questions come to mind, go ahead and add those in there. At the end, I'm going to be going over as many of those as I can get to, and hopefully answering any of the questions that remain on your mind before we end the webinar today. Secondly, I will be making this presentation available to you so that you can download the slides before the end of the presentation as well. So the topic we're talking about today was a little facetious when I said the exciting topic. I know it isn't altogether that fun or sensational when you're talking donor retention, but as you'll see, the content that I've laid out for you today is in the theme of a comic book superhero, and that's no mistake. When I say unlock your fundraising superpower, I'm not just playing around with words. What you'll see is that with just a little bit of effort in the right places, such as donor retention, that is the key. The donor retention to the key is the key to your nonprofit, to taking that nonprofit and your nonprofit to a whole nother level. Now, I know that so many nonprofit leaders, development managers, and fundraisers, I know that you all would really literally feel like this was a superpower you realized if you found a way to double your donor retention rate. And that's my goal, that following today's webinar, there won't be any ambiguity left as to what donor retention means to you, and that you'll have a clear roadmap you can start taking steps down beginning today. Another thing to note that as we go through this, I know most of you found some new donors this week during Giving Tuesday. And since we'll be spending some time on retaining those first-time donors and how to do that today, keep those new donors from Giving Tuesday in the back of your mind. You're going to receive some specific tasks that I'll be recommending, and these first-time donors from this week will be your first target. For those of you who I've never had the chance to meet, however you found this webinar, welcome. I'm glad you found this webinar. My name is Dan Mastin, and I run a small agency called Benchmarq, and we focus on helping nonprofits raise more money online. We do this through nonprofit website design, focused on your nonprofit's goals and your vision, and we pair that with a marketing, communications, and fundraising strategy that is specific to those goals. My background consists of nearly 10 years at a large nonprofit software and consulting company called Blackbaud, where I spent most of those years working with hundreds of nonprofits in these areas, many of them being large nonprofits that we've all heard of. But when I launched my agency, it was with the goal of offering a high level of expertise when it comes to digital marketing for nonprofits of all sizes. Most days you'll find me meeting and speaking with nonprofit leaders. I've seen some familiar names in the waiting room before we got started today. Some of you I've actually met several times over cups of coffee. And the thing is, finding ways, you're talking with them, talking with you, meeting you by phone and in person, what that is, it's finding ways to help you, but also looking to learn everything that I can just from those interactions. You all probably have realized at some point that there aren't many consultants, nonprofit consultants out there that get it. And as in what it's really like from where you sit, working your butt off on behalf of your mission. So I know the more I learn directly from you, the more I know what problems you need help solving the most. And that's what brings us here today. I recognized a huge gap in information and clear action-oriented recommendations when it comes to donor retention. And as the busiest time of the year winds down in a few weeks, I felt everyone would benefit greatly from a complete and fresh perspective on donor retention and some clear steps to get there. So what we're going to be covering today will span across these four areas. I like to start all my webinars with a level set on the topic at hand Before we talk specifics, I want to make sure we are all on the same page in how donor retention is defined, because it can vary from nonprofit to nonprofit. And so we'll talk about that and how you can determine exactly what your donor retention rate is and how you can approach it based on your specific goals. We'll then break down that action plan into 3 areas: what donors want, how to give it to them, and how to guide them into being more engaged overall. We're going to cover the specifics of the communications plan, and much of what I'll be recommending comes not only just from my experience, but studies along the way that have proven when and how to communicate most effectively. So let's jump in by talking about some donor retention facts. Fact 1, the average donor retention rate across the industry is between 30 to 40%. For larger organizations where there are individuals who have time to focus on donor retention specifically, you may see this rate rise into the 40 to 50% range, but what I find most are nonprofits that have no one dedicated to this role, meaning all your effort is placed on finding new donors, and the retention rate will actually be down more around the 20% range. And an analogy I heard once that rings so true and seemed to make so much sense in this area was that it's as if many fundraisers carry around a bucket of water with holes in it. And you work so hard to keep adding water, but as you add water in the top, you just can't get ahead because it keeps pouring out the bottom. And so I bet that feels pretty familiar to a lot of you that are here today. And donor retention is about focusing on plugging those holes. And what's great is once the holes are plugged, operationally speaking, you don't have to keep focusing on them. A little maintenance from time to time, sure, but you'll afford yourself the chance to keep focusing on donors and finding new donors. It isn't an either or, as I'll explain today. Fact number 2, finding a new donor is 5 times more expensive than keeping an existing one. As you'll see today, we'll be focusing on low-cost efforts of communicating with existing donors in ways that will retain them, as opposed to the expensive efforts by people, advertising, and marketing that's required to attract new donors. And back to that bucket analogy, holding the bucket with the water in it is far easier than continuing to run around and find new sources of water. Fact number 3, once a donor has given twice, they're more likely to keep giving. Studies show that 50% of donors who gave a second time gave a third, and 70% of those donors who gave a third time continue to give again. So what that really helps us do is it shows that that second gift is where most of the magic happens. Take, for instance, for every extra 10 donors that you can get to give a second time, 7 of those will just keep giving. So efforts will still be in place, to keep donors informed and engaged, but this should help you really zero in on the most important step. And that important step is getting that second gift. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the action plan, let's take a minute to ensure we're all defining retention rates similarly and how we're identifying where the gaps are. Simply put, your donor retention rate is calculated by first identifying how many donors you had last year. So let's say the calendar year 2018. We're then going to identify how many of those donors gave again this year in 2019. So you have those 2 numbers. You then divide them. You take the donors who gave again this year, so those who gave in 2019, and you divide that by the number who gave in 2018. That's your donor retention rate. Then before starting to place efforts anywhere, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, we need to understand where the gaps are by identifying who those lost donors are, right? The reason we need to do this next is because identifying these weak points is central to understanding where to place specific efforts. For most of the largest group of donors lost will be those that gave the first time, then were never seen or heard from again. But you may also have weak points that can be specified further, like those who got involved through a peer-to-peer event, or got involved and gave through a Facebook fundraiser, or some other major campaign that you have each year. The point is, we need to understand how these donors came into the fold and where we likely lost them in the first place. But even as we look at year over year and identify our retention rate and the gaps, just be sure to keep an eye on the big picture. We will focus largely on getting the second gift today, but keep in mind that donor retention isn't just about the second gift or looking at things from one year to the next. There is an overall constituent journey here. That journey starts the moment they come in contact with your nonprofit and where they go as a supporter and the type of supporter they eventually become. Because after that first gift, there are opportunities to turn that donor into one or all of these types of supporters: recurring donors, larger donors, event attendees, volunteers, fundraisers, advocates, evangelists. And this is where some of you will be different from others. You all know what's important to you and what makes your nonprofit tick. So some of you focus almost solely on fundraising dollars. Others may have a much heavier focus on volunteers, for instance. The point is, while donor retention is the overarching goal here, the touch points these donors have with your nonprofit, they're multifaceted, and we need to be sure to cultivate that entire constituent journey. Another thing you must do is take a look at yourself a bit and consider what you are doing to make your organization enjoyable to interact with. Is your online giving experience something that is enjoyable and something that will make donors want to go through again? That's the sort of the first and most important leading question. With more than 50% of donors saying they prefer to give online, would you describe the process of giving online to your nonprofit easy and effortless? If the user is on a smartphone, where more than half of all online gifts come from these days, how much work is involved in finding and then submitting a gift? Is your website easy to navigate? Is it easy to find your donation form regardless of where they are on the site? Is the website helpful by reflecting who you are as a nonprofit and what's important to you? If the answer to any of this is a no, or if you even hesitate a little, there's work to be done here too. And you're all going to use a variety of donation software. I know some of the donors' donation software is better than others at providing clean and easy forms that integrate into your website. You may not have complete control over some things, but I've worked with many nonprofits who just weren't using all the options to embed the form well. You're all short on time. You're all short on these things that take you away from these small little efforts. And some just haven't made the necessary adjustments to make engagement easier and the donor experience easier. Many have made forms not easy enough to find on the website or even intuitive enough to their donors. We need to take another look at the giving experience from the perspective of the donor. And that's the point here. We want to remove all hurdles or speed bumps that we can on the way to making a gift to your nonprofit. Now let's get into the donor retention action plan. That's what we're here today. That's what we're here to really teach you and share today and talk about. We're going to start with giving the donor what they want. When asked, there are two things donors say they expect more than anything, and that is emotional fulfillment and real-world results. One of the ways in which a donor will feel emotional fulfillment is by receiving a warmly written and personal thank you. I found that most nonprofits believe they thank their donors well, but once we drill down and we look at the specifics of what they're doing and what they're sending, what I find is that a majority of nonprofits actually send a thank you as part of the confirmation email from the gift submission, and that's about it. And I just want to make sure that I call out that saying thank you as part of an email confirmation that they had donated. This isn't actually a thank you in the way that we're going to talk about it today, at least not in the eyes of a donor. Recently, there was a study done that was aimed at finding out why people stop donating to a nonprofit. And the largest response, 13%, said that they stopped giving because they were not thanked as well or as much as they would have expected. There was another recent survey I read and saw recently that this was a group that surveyed 250 different nonprofits. Some were large, some were small, across different verticals. Their goal is to get a good sample from across the whole nonprofit sector. And what they were looking to identify was how donors were engaged and communicated with following their first donation. So what they did was they actually gave a small gift. The nonprofits had no idea that this group was doing this, but what they did was they made a small gift to 250 nonprofits. And then they sat back and analyzed the communications that came in from them. And the results were pretty astounding. Out of 250 donations to the 250 different nonprofits, about 90% sent an immediate confirmation of the gift, but then less than half of them followed up in the days following to actually thank the donor specifically for their gift. Even fewer emails were received that highlighted what the money was funding and the impact it was making. And lastly, very, very, very few ever sent another message ever in the following 12 months. None of, very, very large amount of them never even sent another message with an additional ask at any point down the road. So what I find more than anything is that when I share these stats, when I have this conversation with a nonprofit, what typically happens more than not is that they kind of stop and they think, wow, I guess that makes sense because we actually do it more like that, actually. So that study was pretty groundbreaking for me and said a lot. But now that we've covered what an effective process looks like when it comes to saying thank you, let's go a level deeper and start talking about how to change what you're doing operationally so that those holes in your bucket start to get plugged. And this begins with what I know some of you cringe at, but it all begins with donor segmentation. This is such a large hurdle for so many of you, and I totally get it. Some of you don't have systems that make it easy. Some of you have had your systems so long that there's no way to segment records that date back so many years. It's a messy job and not something that's easily achieved. I totally see that, but here's the thing. And as we talk about it today, just remember, if you do not segment, then donor retention just really can't be a focus. And you'll see why as we talk about that today. It just can't be. We're going to be talking about three of the most common donor groups that most of you have, at least. The different types of donors and how they range and can be classified are vast, depending on how you classify and define your donors. But we're going to be talking about the three that are most common. We're going to talk about donors, so just the regular donors, the recurring donors, and then first-time donors. If you can somehow find a way to segment just on these three groups, then your fundraising efforts are going to change drastically overnight anyway. And here's why. Each donor segment will get their own email series that you set and forget. This email series will be set up ahead of time, and then you let your email service do the rest. I'm not familiar with any of the major email services that don't allow this functionality, don't have this functionality. It works a bit different in all of them, and there may be heavier lifting in some than others, but I assume most everyone in this webinar today has access to this capability. So let's first talk about the donor series. And this is for donors that give between 1 and 3 times per year. You can go deeper, splitting out donors by amounts given, and those things makes these types of series even more effective. But today I'm sharing a starter level of effort that will go a long way for nearly anyone in the webinar. So you start by sending the thank you within 3 days of the gift being made. These messages should appear as if they come from an actual person not an automated marketing message. The email thanks them for their gift. It recognizes that if they've given in the past, we want to recognize that they see that you have an understanding of their relationship with you and your nonprofit. And then it shares something that shows the impact of their gift. What difference is that gift making for the lives that you touch and that you support? Starting a week later, and then at least once per month, you're then going to continue sending personal messages that shows them further impact that the gift is making. The best way to do this is you share a story of someone who has been helped by the donations made. Then in between these messages, pepper in mentions about volunteering and events. And then after about 6 months, if they aren't a fundraiser on your behalf, like a peer-to-peer leader, or for instance, after about 6 months, you're going to ask them then to make their one-time gift a recurring monthly gift. And if they don't convert to that, then in month 7, you're going to send a new appeal with an ask for another donation. For your monthly donors, you'll send a very special thank you 3 days after each gift. So send that every month after each gift. Just like your donors, you're going to send impact stories 1 to 2 times per month and other messages about volunteer opportunities and events. And again, if they're not a fundraiser, at month 7, you're going to ask them to increase their monthly gift. Now, the amount you ask them to increase should be in the 10 to 20% range, which for most people will be a pretty modest increase. I wouldn't suggest asking for more than a 25% increase unless donations are super small, like those $10 a month kind of donations. Stay in that 10 to 20% ask for an increase. If you've convinced them that their money is achieving real results because you've effectively told the story of the lives being affected positively, then this increase should be a pretty reasonable ask. And lastly, and possibly most important for first-time donors, we started the webinar by talking about how important that second gift is. Well, this is how you're going to approach those first-time donors in order to get that second gift. The great thing is it's much like the other email series, the personal thank yous, the impact stories, volunteer ops, and events, and when to ask for the next gift. But look at number 3 on this list, a donor survey. A donor survey is something you can use to engage a new donor early on that allows them to tell you what they're interested in and how they like to be communicated with. Everyone is a bit different, and so this helps you identify what those differences are. The more you communicate with someone in the way that they've requested, then the more personal the entire relationship feels. In the survey, ask them what topics they're most interested in. Ask them how they like to receive communications, either by email or direct mail. Nearly everyone's going to say email anyway, mostly these days. And ask them if they have an interest in volunteering or attending different types of events. This is a great way to learn so much, and then you can use that to propel your relationship forward. Now, I also mentioned early on that I wanted you to keep those new donors in mind that you may have received on Giving Tuesday. You can start with them and create a series specifically for them starting right now, right? They're right there in your back pocket. They've just come in contact with the organization and donated for the first time. So this gives you a really great chance to start with them. So what I would recommend is first drafting a personal thank you email so that this can go out in the next couple days. And then by early next week, once this goes out, then you can start following the same schedule, adding the impact stories and the donor survey over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So again, I want to highlight your Giving Tuesday donors. I hope that they're fresh in your mind. And again, it's about getting that second gift. And so as we look forward into the spring of 2020, you're getting that second gift 6-7 months into this, or converting that donor to a monthly donor, for instance, looking in March, April of 2020, to get there then, you got to start with them now. So I hope you have a nice little list of first-time donors you can look to. Now, when we talk about showing impact, while it displays real world results that donors want to see, there is another side effect of showing impact, and it's that it builds trust between you and your donors. Each of these 4 areas are things that you can use to show impact and build that trust, such as effective storytelling. Effective storytelling through your website, through your emails, all of your communications, telling stories effectively, and telling stories of someone helped is a must to build that trust. When it comes to operations transparency, don't be scared to share a failure every now and then. It happens. Is there a program that didn't succeed as planned? That's okay. Sharing this with your donors can actually be a positive since it can build trust. As far as your personal communications with donors, again, they should always feel personal. They should always feel as if they're coming from a person. Each email should only have one goal in mind as well. It should never look like a marketing email. It's too easy to compile everything in one email, such as marketing and programs and events and volunteers here and give there. Think of each email that you send as it asking for a single action on your donor's part. This will normally be driven by what your constituent journey is. What is it that you want your donor to do next that moves them through that journey? If you have tons of info you want to communicate, don't be scared to break it up into different emails. And besides, if you aren't communicating enough, or you aren't communicating enough unless you are getting quite a few unsubscribes. Just keep that in mind. An unsubscribe is not a bad thing. An unsubscribe means that they are not your audience. So keep sending the information regardless of that. And lastly, social media, a darling and a demon at the same time for some of you. With social media, don't just do it to be doing it. Establish a goal that you want to achieve and then focus on achieving that goal with every post that you make. Likely it'll be about spreading awareness, which we've done the same way it's done on your website and over email. And that's by posting real stories of those lives that you've touched and that you've changed. Additionally, you can go to the extra mile to appreciate and delight your donors. And here are a couple of examples of that. You can create special events and invite a select few to do something like a facilities tour that ends with a presentation showing, again, the impact of their dollars. You can also create things like insider events, things that feel like an insider event. For instance, let's say you're thinking of launching a new program. Invite a few select donors, do a presentation of the program, but let them know that you wanted their feedback before launching it publicly. And you can do and so many other things. This is a place to really get creative, because anything you can do to make your donors feel special will surely come back to you in the way of increased donations and a higher donor retention rate, which is what we're all here trying to achieve. So we've covered the different pieces of an effective donor retention plan, and I gave you a few guidelines for getting there. However, if you still feel lost, if you're still not sure where to start, or if you're wondering what is actually doable for what we talked about today, I want to invite you to have a conversation with me so that we can talk about your specific situation, your technology, or lack thereof. I want to help you find a way forward. So we'll talk about your situation, some of the offerings I have that can make these things that we talked about doable and making them a reality for you. The conversation is obligation free. I just want to find a way to help you move forward. So I've put a link there within the webinar. I hope you can see that. Click that, share your information with me. We'll find a good time to chat about what you have going on, what's specific to you, and the challenges that you have with donor retention. And again, I just want to find a way that I can help you. Let's see. This is the end of the webinar. So thank you again for joining me. What I want to do is jump over to some questions. I am running this myself, so let me get into the questions tab here and see what some of these questions are and see what I can answer. Can you give an example of a donor segmentation and email response? So we talked about, let's talk about the first-time donors. So the first-time donors, when it comes to the series that you're going to have for them, sort of think of it. So we talked about the constituent journey, right? What this first message, let's just say the first message, what this first message is going to do is prompt that next step. So you're going to thank them for their dollars. You're going to say, this is exactly where your dollars are going to be going. You're going to tell them a story of what that is. But then you can also think of taking this first-time donor and imagine you've just started a position at a new company. What's the first thing they do with you? They onboard you. And a donor's no different. You don't know how you typically may not know how they found you, what they know about your organization up to this point. They may not know all the things that you do. That's highly likely. So what you're going to do is start onboarding them with your organization. When you take your email and start giving them links to an impact story, giving them a link to one of the programs that you've just started, giving them a link to the program that's most effective, where you're seeing the most impact. These are the things that are going to show them how to interact with you. They're going to show them what your organization is all about, what you have as a complete program. So this first message should say, thank you so much for your dollars. This is where your dollars are going to go to. And just so you know, here's some other things that we do, and give them a link to take them to your website, to take them to more information that they may not have yet, that will cultivate that relationship and move them down that constituent journey. I hope that answers your question. I love this one. How to handle donors who send in a check and give no phone number or email. So this depends on, operationally speaking, this is probably the most challenging thing. One, there's no way, they're not plugged into your CRM to allow you to start anything that's automated and done for you. So this is where, if you have the bandwidth, treat this as an offline, take this sort of process and take this offline. If you received a check, then you most likely at least have their mailing address. Then write that hand letter that says the same thing, and try to point them to something digital, right? So you're going to take this letter, thank them from everything. Your stationery, I assume, will have your web address, other ways that they can learn about your organization. So you're still going to start that relationship the same way. You're going to cultivate that the same way. It's thank you. Here's where your dollars go. And just as a reminder, here are some other the things that we're doing. Please check that out. And hopefully they'll get onto the web. One of the other things that we didn't really talk about today, this is sort of a lead capturing kind of topic. And that is, if someone is interested in your organization, they've come to your website, one of the biggest things you can do is get that email address. And so there'll be some other things that I can talk about in another webinar, where it talks about how to get that first bit of information from them. And that's kind of what you're wanting to do here. Send them a letter. Hopefully they'll engage with you digitally. At some point, you'll be able to convert that into an email address. So I hope that answers your questions. Do you have samples, templates of the email series that you can email out? I don't have specific examples, sort of a wide ranging type of one size fits all kind of thing. What I find is that depending on the donors, the size of donors, a lot of those, how the message is composed, it does change. Organizations have different goals. So what you're going to direct them to next in the constituent journey, whether you're just onboarding them with the programs you have, whether you're pointing them towards volunteer opportunities and events, those kind of things, these few messages will be dictated again by you, your goals, your constituent journey. So I don't have anything that works as a one size fits all, but if you want to reach out to me, we can talk about your situation. I'd be happy to kind of talk you through some of that. Okay, so it looks like, yep, so one of the other questions was the same about the lack of email address. So it seems, Paige asks and says that it seems that a lot of stewardship is becoming electronic and not all donors use emails, web communication. And that's absolutely right. And I guess I'm coming from the area of digital, right? So I run a digital marketing agency. So the things we talk about do start and kind of end and remain in digital. And what's great about that is that as an organization, when you're thinking of digital, what's great about that is that's at least where the trend is heading. It's not a one size, I want to use that analogy again, but it's not something that you can just apply to every single donor because not all of them engage with you digitally. It should be at this point the majority of your donors. I assume that the majority of your donors, you do have an email address for, you do market them and engage with them digitally already. And again, for those that they don't use email, they don't use web communication, it's this, you still do the same things. It's just a little bit harder. We talked about filling the holes that are in the bottom of your bucket. A lot of that is about automation. Once you get the hole plugged, you can set it and forget it, have these things running in the background when folks make donations and stuff. Unfortunately, it's hard to kind of automate a handwritten letter. And so these things, these manual processes will remain for a while, but it's very rapidly trending towards digital for everything. The majority of gifts are already coming through online. Those online gifts are already on mobile. So that's where the trends are headed. And so hopefully as your constituent donor base becomes majority digital, this is where all these efforts are going to be becoming super important because you can automate it. You can set it and forget it again. And that's really the point to all this. So that's all the questions it looks like I've gotten today. Again, I hope to hear from some of you. I hope to have some conversations following this webinar. Like I said, reach out, let me know what's going on with you, and we'll talk about how to move things forward for you. So thanks again for joining me today, and have a happy fundraising rest of the week, happy fundraising rest of the year. Best of luck to you, and I hope to talk to some of you again soon. So thank you. Bye-bye.